The radio crackled with static again. I adjusted it for the 100th time, but it was no use. 3 days of silence from the other ranger stations wasn't normal, especially during winter patrol season. Pine Ridge Station, this is Mark Stevens at Cedar Point. Do you copy? Over. Nothing but the soft hiss of snow against my cabin windows answered back. I've been a ranger here in the Boundary Waters for 15 years, and silence like this makes my skin crawl. Something was wrong, really wrong. The thermometer outside my window read -20. The sun would be up for only 5 more hours, and the weather report warned of another storm coming. But I had to check on Pine Ridge Station. Sarah and Tom were stationed there. Good people, experienced rangers. They wouldn't just go radio silent without reason. I packed my survival gear, extra clothes, emergency food, first aid kit, flares, and my trusty rifle. You don't last long as a wilderness ranger without being prepared for anything. If only I knew then what anything really meant. The snowmobile ride to Pine Ridge usually takes 40 minutes. Today, fighting through deep snow and harsh wind, it took over an hour. Something felt off about the station as soon as I saw it. No smoke from the chimney, no lights, no movement. "Sarah! Tom?" I called out as I approached. My voice seemed to get swallowed by the thick snowfall. The station door was slightly open, swaying in the wind. Wrong. All wrong. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd remember that scene for the rest of my life. The place was trashed, chairs overturned, radio equipment smashed. But that wasn't the worst part. There was blood. So much blood. It was frozen in dark patches on the floor and walls. And there, by the radio desk, I found Tom. Or what was left of him. His body was wrong, twisted in ways a human body shouldn't twist. Like something had tried to turn him inside out. My hands shook as I keyed my radio. "Cedar Point emergency. This is Mark Stevens. We have rangers down at Pine Ridge. I need immediate backup." Static was my only answer. I searched the rest of the station. No sign of Sarah. Just more blood. More signs of a terrible struggle. And something else. Strange marks on the walls and floor. Not from bullets or knives. They looked like claw marks, but bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. That's when I heard it. A sound from outside, like boots crunching in snow. I gripped my rifle tight and moved to the window. Through the swirling snow, I saw a figure walking toward the station. It moved like a person, but something about the way it walked wasn't quite right, like someone trying to remember how to be human. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Sarah, is that you?" The figure stopped, then its head turned toward me. And that's when I learned that some things are worse than silence, because what looked back at me wore Sarah's face. But the eyes were all wrong. I ran. God help me, I ran. Back to my snowmobile, through the bitter cold. The whole ride back to Cedar Point, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd seen wearing Sarah's face was following me. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. Out of 32 rangers in our region, I was about to become the last one standing. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if I'm really me anymore. I spent that night at Cedar Point Station with my rifle close by. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old building made me jump. I kept thinking about Tom's body and that thing wearing Sarah's face. When morning came, I tried the radio again. "This is Mark Stevens at Cedar Point. Any rangers out there? Anyone?" Nothing. Just that endless static. I knew I had to check the other stations. There were 5 more spread across our region, and I hadn't heard from any of them in days. The thought of going back out there made my stomach turn. But these people weren't just my colleagues, they were my friends. First stop was Moose Lake Station, where Jack and Maria were posted. The snow had stopped, but the cold was worse than yesterday. The trees cracked and popped in the freezing air as I rode my snowmobile through the white forest. Moose Lake Station looked fine from the outside. No broken windows, no signs of trouble. But I knew better now. "Jack? Maria?" I called from outside. No answer. The door was locked this time. I used my master key, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get it in the lock. Inside, everything was neat and tidy. Too tidy, like someone had cleaned up very carefully. The guest log on the desk caught my eye. The last entry was from 3 days ago. Ranger Sarah Matthews checked in at 2:15 p.m. My blood went cold. Sarah? The same Sarah I'd seen at Pine Ridge? That's when I noticed the smell. Anyone who's worked search and rescue knows that smell. I followed it to the basement door. I almost didn't open it. Part of me wanted to run away and never look back, but I had to know. The basement was dark. My flashlight beam showed empty shelves, old equipment, and then, them. Jack and Maria were there, propped up in the corner. Their bodies were twisted just like Tom's, but different too. Like something had tried to wear them like clothes, but couldn't quite figure out how. I threw up right there on the basement floor. When I finally made it back upstairs, I noticed something I'd missed before. The radio logbook was open. The last entry was in Maria's handwriting, but it didn't make sense. It comes in through the wounds. It wears us, but it can't wear the dead ones right. It needs them warm. Sarah came, but not Sarah. Jack tried to shoot, but bullets don't work. It's learning, getting better at being us. If you read this, run. Just run. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, rifle ready. Jack stood there, but not Jack. His body was moving all wrong, jerky and stiff. His face split into a smile that was too wide, showing too many teeth. "Hello, Mark," it said in Jack's voice, but the words came out wrong, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. "I've been practicing." I fired 3 shots straight into its chest. Jack's body stumbled back but kept coming. The wounds. God, the wounds were moving, like something was crawling around inside him. I ran for the door, but it was frozen shut. Jack's body kept coming, still wearing that terrible smile. Then I remembered the back window, the one we always kept unlocked for emergencies. I crashed through it, glass shattering around me. Landed hard in the snow. My rifle was lost somewhere inside, but I didn't care. I just ran for my snowmobile. As I sped away, I looked back once. Jack's body stood in the broken window, still smiling. But now Maria's body was there too, moving like a puppet with tangled strings. They waved at me, almost friendly-like, 5 more stations to check. But now I knew I wasn't searching for survivors anymore. I was hunting something that was hunting us. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I drove my snowmobile to Eagle Point Station. The cold wasn't the reason. I kept seeing Jack's twisted smile, kept hearing those words. I've been practicing. Eagle Point was our main station, with better equipment and a backup generator. If anyone had survived, they'd go there. As I approached, I saw lights on inside. My heart jumped. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. I parked behind some trees instead of right out front. After what I'd seen, I wasn't taking chances. Through my binoculars, I watched the station for 10 minutes. No movement. The door was unlocked. Inside, the generator hummed, keeping the heat and lights on. Everything looked normal, except for the thick layer of dust. Nobody had been here for days. I went straight to the security office. We'd installed cameras last summer after having trouble with vandals. The system saved 2 weeks of footage. My hands trembled as I rewound the tapes. 4 days ago, 2 a.m., the front door opened. Peter from Birch Station walked in, looking scared. He ran to the radio room. I turned up the volume to hear his call. "Emergency! Something's wrong with the Rangers at Birch. They're not themselves. Oh God, Lisa just walked past the window, but I saw her die an hour ago. Her neck was..." Static cut him off. The camera showed Peter grabbing emergency supplies. Then he looked up suddenly, like he heard something. The door opened. Lisa walked in. Her neck was bent at an impossible angle, but she was smiling. "Peter," she said, her voice all wrong. "Why did you run? We just want to understand you better, to wear you better." Peter ran. The camera showed him heading for the back door, but 2 more Rangers were there, ones I recognized from Birch Station. Their bodies moved like they were being controlled by strings. I couldn't watch what happened next, but I forced myself to. I needed to understand what we were up against. The thing that used to be Lisa bent over Peter's body. Something dark and shiny, like oil but alive, poured from her mouth into his wounds. Peter's body started twitching, then stood up. But it wasn't Peter anymore. The camera caught what happened next. This new Peter thing turned to Lisa and spoke. "This one is fresh. The meat is still warm. Much better than the cold ones. We learn more each time." I shut off the video, feeling sick. Now I knew. It couldn't take over dead bodies properly. It needed living ones. That's why Tom and the others were so twisted. They were already dead when it tried to take them. A noise from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps. Lots of them. I peeked out the office door. My heart nearly stopped. The main room was full of rangers, at least 8 of them. Some I recognized from other stations. They were just standing there, heads tilted, like they were listening for something. Then Peter's voice called out, "Mark? We know you're here. We found your snowmobile tracks. Don't be afraid. We only want to understand you. To where you." They started searching the station, moving room by room, getting closer. I looked around desperately. The security office had no windows. One door. I was trapped. Then I remembered the old laundry chute. It hadn't been used in years, but it led to the basement. If I could reach the basement's emergency exit? I heard them in the hallway now, footsteps getting closer. The door handle started to turn. Sometimes the only way out is down. I slid down the laundry chute just as the office door opened. It was a tight fit, and the metal was freezing cold. I dropped into a pile of old blankets in the basement, trying not to make a sound. Above me, I heard them searching. "Check every room," Peter's voice called out. "It needs to be alive when we catch it." The basement was pitch black. I clicked on my flashlight, keeping the beam pointed down. Old boxes, cleaning supplies, and there, the emergency exit. I took one step toward it. A board creaked under my foot. The noise upstairs stopped. Then Lisa's voice. "The basement! It's in the basement!" I ran for the exit. Behind me, footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. The emergency door was stuck, frozen shut from the cold. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice. It burst open just as hands grabbed for me. I stumbled out into the snow, the bitter wind hitting my face like a slap. My snowmobile was on the other side of the building. No time to reach it. The forest was my only chance. I ran, snow crunching under my boots. "Mark!" Sarah's voice called from behind me. "You can't run forever. The storm is coming." She was right. Dark clouds were rolling in fast. A storm this bad would mean zero visibility. I'd freeze to death out here, if they didn't catch me first. I knew these woods, though. 15 years of patrols had taught me every trail, every landmark. About half a mile ahead was an old ranger cabin we used for storage. If I could just reach it. Something crashed through the trees to my left. Jack's body burst out, running at me with that twisted smile. I changed direction, ducking under snow-heavy branches. More shapes moved in the trees around me. They were trying to circle me, herd me like a deer. Well, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I grabbed a handful of snow and threw it at Jack's face, then shoved him hard. He stumbled, giving me just enough space to sprint past. The storage cabin was close now. Through the falling snow, I could see its dark shape. Just a little further. My foot caught on a hidden root. I fell hard, face first into the snow. By the time I got up, they had me surrounded. 8 of them, all people I'd known for years. All moving like puppets, wearing those awful smiles. "No more running," Peter said, stepping forward. "We just want to understand, to learn, to wear you." Sarah moved closer, her neck still bent wrong. "It won't hurt for long. Then you'll be part of us. Won't that be nice?" I stood up straight, snow falling harder around us. "You want to understand?" I said. "Then understand this." I pulled out my emergency flare, sparked it, and threw it at the cabin's propane tank. The explosion knocked us all back. I'd known about that leaky tank for months, kept meaning to fix it. Now I was glad I hadn't. Through the flames and chaos, I ran. The storm hit full force, a white wall of snow that hid everything. Behind me, I heard screaming, but not human screaming. It sounded like 1,000 voices all tangled together. I ran until my lungs burned. When I couldn't run anymore, I found a hollow under a fallen tree and crawled in. The storm raged overhead, but I stayed quiet and still. Hours passed. The screaming stopped. The storm howled on. I thought I was safe. I thought I'd hurt them, maybe even stop them. I was wrong, because as I huddled there in the dark, I felt something warm drip onto my neck, and when I touched it, my fingers came away shiny and black, like oil, but alive. I rolled out from under the fallen tree just as the black liquid tried to drop onto my face. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the storm. The thing that looked like Sarah hung from the tree above me, her body bent like a spider. "Almost had you," she said, smiling with too many teeth. I ran. The storm was still raging, but a faint glow in the distance caught my eye. Eagle Point Station. The explosion must have damaged the thing inside Sarah, made her slower. I had a chance, but I needed weapons. The station's gun safe was my only hope. The wind howled, throwing ice and snow in my face as I fought my way toward the lights. Behind me, I heard them moving through the trees, not even trying to be quiet now. They knew they had me. I crashed through the station's front door, slamming it behind me. The power was still on, but smoke from the explosion had gotten inside. Perfect. That would make it harder for them to see me. I ran to the gun safe in the security office, my hands shaking as I put in the code. Please work. Please work. The safe clicked open. I grabbed everything I could: shotgun, ammo, my backup hunting rifle. The front door burst open. They poured in: Sarah, Jack, Peter, Lisa, and 4 others, all moving wrong, all wearing those terrible smiles. The black oil dripped from their wounds, sizzling when it hit the floor. "No more running, Mark," they said together, their voices mixed into one awful sound. "We've learned so much about bodies, about pain, about being human. Now teach us more." I fired the shotgun. The blast caught Peter in the chest, spinning him around, but he kept coming, black oil filling the hole. "Bullets don't work," Sarah laughed. "You saw that already. We adapt. We learn." "Yeah," I said. "Learn from this." I fired at the ceiling sprinklers. The water system was old, filled with rust. Brown water sprayed everywhere. They looked up, confused. Then I threw my last emergency flare. The station's backup generator exploded. Flames raced through the walls. The sprinklers kept spraying, turning the smoke into a thick, choking fog. They screamed. That same twisted, many-voiced scream from before. The water seemed to hurt them, making the black oil run off their bodies. I grabbed the fire axe from the wall. If bullets wouldn't work, maybe this would. What happened next was a nightmare. In the smoke and water and flames, we fought. Every time I cut one down, the black oil would try to reach for me, but the water kept washing it away, weakening it. One by one, they fell. Not because I was stronger or smarter, but because the real Sarah, Jack, Peter, and the others had taught me everything they knew over the years. Now I used those lessons to give them peace. Finally, only Sarah was left. She wasn't smiling anymore. "You don't understand," she said, her voice almost normal. "We only wanted to learn, to become, to be alive." "I understand enough," I said, and swung the axe one last time. The station was burning fast now. I stumbled outside into the storm, exhausted. My clothes were soaked, already freezing in the cold. I looked back at the burning building. Had I got them all? Hard to tell. The fire would destroy any trace of that black oil. Maybe that was for the best. The storm was easing up. Dawn would come soon. I needed to call for help, warn other ranger stations in other regions. I turned toward my snowmobile. That's when I noticed something wrong with my hand. Just a small cut, probably from the fight. But there was something black seeping into it. Something that looked like oil, but alive. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a new smile starting. They were right. Bullets don't work. Because I'm still here. Still walking. Still wearing Mark's face. And I'm getting better at being human every day. I never thought I'd see something that would change my life forever in these mountains. But that's exactly what happened last winter, during the coldest day Denali National Park had seen in decades. My name is Sarah and I'm a Winter Patrol Ranger here at Denali. Well, I was until that day. Being a ranger runs in my family. My grandfather did it, and his father before him. They taught me everything about surviving in these mountains. The way the snow crunches differently when it's too cold, how to read the wind, and most importantly, to always trust your gut when something feels wrong. That morning started like any other. I was standing by the window of our ranger station, holding my coffee mug with both hands to warm them up. The thermometer outside showed minus 58 degrees, cold enough to freeze your spit before it hits the ground. I watched the sun come up, turning the snowy peaks pink and orange, just like it had done thousands of times before. "You sure about going out there today?" Mike, our station coordinator, asked me. He was the kind of person who always worried about his team, like a mother hen with too many chicks. "Those weather stations can wait another day." I took another sip of my coffee, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. You know what my grandfather always said. The park doesn't take days off, so neither do we. I smiled, remembering how many times I'd heard those words growing up. The job seemed simple enough. Check on 3 weather stations that had stopped sending us information during the night. I'd done this kind of thing so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed, or so I thought. "Just remember," Mike said as I put on my heavy winter gear, "radio check every hour. And Sarah?" He gave me that serious look he saves for when he really means business. "Don't try to be a hero if things get rough out there." If only I'd known then how much I'd need that advice. Because what I was about to find out there in the snow wasn't just another broken weather station. It was something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about our world and change the way I looked at nature forever. But let me tell you exactly what happened that day, and you can decide for yourself what to believe. The first hour wasn't too bad. My snowmobile hummed beneath me as I drove through the endless white landscape. The first weather station was an easy fix, just some ice buildup on the sensors. I defrosted them with my special toolkit, logged the repair, and got ready to head to the next one. Normal stuff, really. But then, something changed. I first noticed it on my way to the second station. From far away, I saw what looked like dark shapes in the snow. As I got closer, my stomach did a weird flip. There were caribou, a whole group of them. But something was terribly wrong. I turned off my snowmobile and walked closer, the snow crunching under my boots. Every step I took made my heart beat faster. The caribou were completely frozen, which sometimes happens in super cold weather. But it wasn't that they were frozen that scared me. It was how they were frozen. They looked like they had been running away from something. Some were frozen mid-jump, their legs stretched out like they were trying to leap over an invisible fence. Their faces? I'll never forget their faces. They looked terrified, like they'd seen something so scary they'd rather run straight into the deadly cold than face it. My hands shook a little as I reached for my radio. "Station base. This is Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mike, you there?" The radio crackled. "Here, Sarah. Everything okay?" "I'm at grid point 27. There's something weird here. The caribou, they're frozen, but not like normal. They look like they were running from something." There was a pause before Mike answered. "Take some pictures, but don't spend too long out there. Your next check-in is in 45 minutes. I took out my phone and snapped some photos, but they couldn't really capture how strange it all was. As I walked back to my snowmobile, the wind picked up, making this weird whistling sound through my helmet. I told myself it was just the wind, but it almost sounded like a warning. The second weather station was even worse. When I got there, my flashlight beam showed me something that made my blood run cold. The station, this big metal box that's supposed to be sturdy enough to survive anything, was crushed. Not just broken, but crushed, like something huge had smashed into it. Around the wreckage, I found more frozen animals, Arctic foxes, snow hares, and even a huge moose, all frozen the same way as the caribou, like they were running away from something terrible. I checked my thermometer. Minus 62 degrees now. That's dangerous cold, even for someone like me who's used to winter in Alaska. The wind was getting stronger too, throwing tiny ice crystals at my face mask like little needles. That's when I heard it, a sound I can't even properly describe. Like ice cracking, but deeper, almost like the mountain itself was groaning. and then I saw something moving in the distance, something that definitely wasn't human. I should have radioed back to base right then. I should have jumped on my snowmobile and gotten out of there as fast as I could. That's what any sensible person would have done. But I didn't. Because in all my years as a ranger, all the stories my grandfather told me, nothing had prepared me for what I was about to see next. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how sometimes when you're really cold, your brain starts seeing things that aren't there? That's what I hoped this was. But it wasn't. About 50 yards ahead of me, something huge moved through the swirling snow. I killed my snowmobile's engine and ducked behind it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Through the falling snow, I could see it clearly now, and my brain kept saying, "This can't be real. This can't be real." But it was real. Oh, it was real. The creature was as tall as 3 people standing on each other's shoulders. Its body looked like it was made of ice, but not regular ice. It was somehow alive, shifting between clear and cloudy like a glacier in motion. The strangest part was its eyes. They were deep blue and glowed from within, like the heart of an ice cave when the sun hits it just right. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my radio when I pulled it out. "Base," I whispered. "This is Sarah. I'm seeing... I don't know what I'm seeing. There's something out here. Something big." The radio just gave me static. Great. Just great. I stayed as still as possible, barely breathing. The creature turned its huge head toward me and I felt my whole body go cold, colder than the minus 65 degrees showing on my thermometer. But then something weird happened. Instead of coming after me, it raised one of its massive arms and pointed at something, like it was trying to show me something. Now, everything I'd ever learned about survival told me to get out of there, but something in those glowing blue eyes made me look where it was pointing. Through the snow, I could see dark patches spreading across the white ground about a quarter-mile away. The permafrost, the permanently frozen ground, it was melting. And not just a little bit, but creating huge holes in the earth. That's when things got even stranger. The creature took a step toward me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. But it wasn't attacking. It moved slowly, carefully, like it was trying not to scare me. The sound it made, it reminded me of ice cracking on a lake in spring, but somehow sadder. It reached down and touched the snow with one massive hand. Right before my eyes, the snow started to form patterns. Not random patterns, but ones I recognized from my climate studies. They were temperature graphs, showing changes over thousands of years. You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature's eyes seemed to glow brighter. That's when it hit me. All those frozen animals we'd found. They weren't running away from the creature. They were running from what the creature was trying to warn them about. My radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. "Sarah, do you copy? We're getting crazy readings. The permafrost is collapsing all across the north sector." I looked at the creature, then at the growing dark patches in the snow, and realized I had a choice to make. A really big, really scary choice. Because now I understood what was happening, but I also knew nobody would ever believe me without proof. My fingers were starting to turn white with frostbite. The temperature was dropping even faster now. I had maybe minutes to decide what to do, and whatever I chose would change everything. My fingers had gone completely numb, and my time was running out. The creature was causing the extreme cold. I could see that now. It was trying to refreeze the melting permafrost before all the dangerous gases trapped inside could escape into the air, like putting a lid back on a shaken soda can before it explodes. "I need proof," I said through chattering teeth, pulling out my camera with hands I could barely feel. "No one's going to believe this without proof." The creature seemed to understand. It stood still, those blue eyes glowing brighter than ever, while I took picture after picture with my freezing hands. The temperature gauge on my jacket now read minus 70 degrees, colder than I'd ever experienced in my life. "Base," I managed to say into my radio, my voice shaking from the cold. "Mike, listen carefully. You need to evacuate everyone from the north sector right now. The permafrost is collapsing." I took a deep breath. knowing what I had to say next. And Mike? Remember all those reports I wrote about climate change? The ones everyone kept ignoring? Well, it's time to take them seriously. The creature raised its massive arms, and I watched in amazement as waves of intense cold rolled across the landscape. The dark patches of melting permafrost started to refreeze, crackling like ice cubes in warm water, but backwards. My vision was getting blurry. I knew I should run, try to get back to my snowmobile, but my legs wouldn't move. The last thing I remember was watching the creature slowly dissolve into the wind, like sugar in hot tea, its job done. It was going back to sleep, waiting for the next time it would need to warn us. Then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived, but they couldn't save all my fingers. I lost 3 of them to the extreme cold. The official report said it was just extreme weather conditions, but I knew better. The photos from my camera came out weird, just blurry shapes in the snow. The cold had damaged the camera too much to show what I'd really seen. But I didn't need pictures to know what I had to do next. I couldn't be a field ranger anymore. You need all your fingers for that job. But maybe that was okay. Maybe I was meant to help in a different way. So I went back to school and became a climate scientist instead. Now I study the permafrost, trying to understand it better and protect it. I want to make sure we hear the warning that creature was trying to give us, even if most people will never know it exists. Sometimes, on really cold nights when I'm at my research station, I look out the window and see a familiar blue glow in the distance. And I know it's still out there, sleeping in the ancient ice, waiting to wake up if we ever need its warning again. But here's the thing about warnings. They only work if we listen to them. And that's why I'm telling you this story now. Because even if you don't believe me about the ice creature, the warning is real. Our world is changing, and we need to pay attention. As for my missing fingers, well, every time they ache in cold weather, I remember what I saw that day. And I know that sometimes the most important things in life are the ones that are hardest to explain. I never thought I'd end up being a forest ranger. Not in a million years. Back in 1898, I was fighting in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. And let me tell you, it was nothing like the newspapers made it sound. The things I saw there changed me. When I came home to Boston, I couldn't handle it anymore. The clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones made me jump. The crowd noise at markets sent my heart racing. Even my own family walking up behind me could make me break into a cold sweat. My doctor called it war nerves. Said I needed quiet and fresh air. That's when I saw the newspaper ad. Wanted. Forest ranger for Green Mountain National Forest. Must be self-reliant and comfortable with solitude. Comfortable with solitude? After what I'd been through, solitude sounded like heaven. The cabin they gave me wasn't much, just 4 walls, a roof, and a pot-bellied stove. But it was mine. Every morning, I'd wake up to birds singing instead of city noise. The air smelled like pine needles and earth instead of coal smoke and horse manure. For the first time since coming home from the war, I could breathe again. My job was simple enough. I'd patrol the trails, mark new paths with red paint so hikers wouldn't get lost, check for illegal hunting, and keep an eye out for forest fires. The Forest Service was new back then. They were still figuring things out. Most days, I'd pack some bread and cheese in my bag, fill my canteen, and just walk. Miles and miles of nothing but trees, rocks, and wild animals. I started talking to the trees sometimes, not because I was crazy, just because it felt right. "Morning, old pine," I'd say to this huge tree near my cabin. "How are the squirrels treating you today?" The locals thought I was odd, but I didn't mind. Better to be the weird forest ranger than the jumpy war veteran who couldn't handle being in town. I kept my cabin neat and clean. Everything had its place. My boots by the door, my rifle on its rack, my ranger's badge on the small table where I ate my meals. The badge was special to me. Major Harrison, my old commanding officer, had pulled some strings to get me this job. "Webb," he'd said, "you've served your country in war. Now serve her in peace." I'd polish that badge every night before bed, watching the lamplight catch on its surface. One morning, the mail brought a letter that changed everything. Ranger Webb, it read. We're sending you a junior ranger to train. His name is Michael Foster. Make sure he learns everything he needs to know about forest work. I didn't like this one bit. Teaching someone meant talking, and talking wasn't really my thing anymore. But orders were orders. Michael showed up 3 days later. He walked up to my cabin early in the morning, carrying a backpack that looked too new and boots that weren't dirty enough. His face was young, maybe 20 years old, and he had this excited smile that made me feel tired just looking at it. Mr. Webb, he stuck out his hand. I'm Michael Foster. I can't tell you how excited I am to learn from you, sir. I shook his hand but didn't say much, just grabbed my gear and said, follow me. That first day, I took him on my regular route. Every few minutes, he'd ask a question. What kind of tree is that? How do you know which way is north without a compass? Why do you mark the trails with red paint instead of blue? Is that a bear track? I gave him short answers at first, but then something funny happened. We found some deer tracks in the mud, and Michael got down on his knees to look at them closer. These are so clear, he said, but how can you tell which way the deer went? I found myself kneeling next to him. See these deeper marks at the front? I pointed. The deer pushes off with its back feet, so the front prints are always deeper. It was heading that way, toward the stream. His eyes lit up like I'd just shown him real magic. And you know what? It felt good to share what I knew. Days turned into weeks. Michael was like a sponge, soaking up everything I taught him. He learned to tell the difference between coyote and wolf tracks. He figured out how to mark trails, so even a blind man could follow them. He even started carrying his own lunch, bread and cheese, just like me. Some days, we'd sit on this big rock overlooking the valley while we ate. He'd tell me about his family back in Burlington, and I'd share little bits about my time before the forest. Not the war stuff, never that, but good memories, like fishing with my dad or my first time camping. Mr. Webb, he asked one day, do you ever get scared out here, all alone? I thought about it. Used to, I said. Not anymore. The forest, it's honest. What you see is what you get, no surprises. Boy, was I wrong about that last part. It was getting darker earlier now that fall was coming. The shadows under the trees stretched longer, and the mist started doing things that mist shouldn't do. I remember the exact moment things started getting weird. We were marking a new trail near Beaver Creek when I noticed the fog moving strange. Now I'd seen every kind of weather these mountains could throw at a person. But this was different. The mist was creeping along the ground, but it was moving against the wind. And in that mist, I could have sworn I heard something. A voice so faint it might have been my imagination. Michael, I said, you hear that? He looked up from where he was painting a tree trunk. Hear what, Mr. Webb? That voice in the... I stopped. The voice was clearer now. It was saying numbers, like someone reading map coordinates. And I knew that voice. It belonged to old Jack Turner, the ranger who died last winter when he fell into Miller's Ravine. But that was impossible, because old Jack Turner was dead, and dead men don't talk. I looked at Michael's confused face and forced a smile. Never mind. Must have been a bird. But as we walked back to the cabin that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in my forest. And the mist, it seemed to follow us home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fog pressed against my cabin windows like a cat wanting to come in. I kept hearing whispers, soft at first, like leaves rustling, then clearer, numbers and directions, trail markers and warnings, all in old Jack's voice. I got up and lit my oil lamp. The yellow light made the fog outside look darker. I'd never tell anyone this, but my hands were shaking as I made some coffee. You're being silly, Webb, I told myself. Just the wind playing tricks. But the next day was worse. Michael and I were checking the trail near Bear Rock when the mist rolled in. It wasn't normal morning fog. This was different. Regular fog is like a blanket that covers everything. This stuff moved like it was looking for something. Mr. Webb? Michael's voice sounded small. Is it supposed to get this foggy in the afternoon? Before I could answer, we heard it. A whistle. 3 short blasts. That was the ranger emergency signal. But it wasn't coming from one place. It seemed to be coming from everywhere around us. That's odd, Michael said. Nobody else is supposed to be up here today. My mouth went dry. They're not. The whistle came again, but this time I recognized it. It was the special way old Jack used to do it. 2 sharp blasts and 1 long one. I'd heard it 100 times when we worked together. Let's head back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Weather's turning bad. But as we turned around, the mist got thicker, and now there were more voices in it. Not just old Jack's, but others too. I heard Sam Peterson, who died in a rock slide 2 years ago, and Bill Michaels, who got lost in a blizzard back in '05. They were all rangers, all dead, all talking at once. Michael grabbed my arm. Mr. Webb, the fog, it's following us. He was right. The mist was moving with us, staying just a few feet away no matter which way we turned. And in it, I started seeing things. Faces forming and fading away, hands reaching out before dissolving. Don't look at it, I said. Just keep walking. We made it back to the cabin, but I knew something was very wrong. These mountains were trying to tell me something, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like what it was. That night, I made Michael stay in the spare room. Told him it wasn't safe to walk back to town in the fog. But really, I didn't want him out there alone. Not with whatever was in that mist. I sat by the window watching. The fog pressed against the glass, and in its swirls, I saw faces I knew. Old Jack's weather-beaten face, Sam's crooked nose, Bill's bushy eyebrows. They formed and faded, over and over, like they were trying to tell me something. Mr. Webb? Michael's voice made me jump. He was standing in the doorway in his sleep clothes. I can't sleep. I keep hearing whistles. I was about to tell him it was just his imagination when we both heard it. Clear as day. 3 short blasts, then 2 sharp and 1 long, then 1 long and 3 short. Different signals from different rangers, all at once. Those are ranger signals, Michael said. But how? Get some sleep, kid, I said. Tomorrow we need to visit someone in town, someone who might know what's happening. But as Michael went back to his room, I stayed by the window. The mist was gathering thicker now, and in it, I saw more faces. Faces of every ranger who'd ever died in these mountains. And somehow, deep in my gut, I knew they were calling to me, trying to warn me. Or maybe they wanted something else. I touched my ranger badge, feeling its familiar shape under my fingers. Whatever was out there in the mist, it had something to do with us rangers. And I had a feeling that by morning, things were going to get a whole lot worse. The next morning, I took Michael to see Mrs. Martha Whitaker. She lived in a small house at the edge of town and had been here longer than anyone. If anyone knew what was happening in these mountains, it would be her. Her hands shook as she poured us tea. She was old, but her eyes were sharp as she looked at us. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked me. "The mist that moves wrong?" I nearly dropped my cup. "How did you know?" She sat down heavily in her rocking chair. "Because every ranger who's ever worked these mountains has seen it, eventually." She looked at Michael, though usually not so young. "Mrs. Whitaker," I said, leaning forward. "What is it?" She rocked back and forth, the chair creaking. "It started with James McKenna, first ranger we ever had here back in 1882. Good man, smart man, got caught in a storm one winter night." She paused to sip her tea. "They found him frozen solid that spring. But funny thing was, people kept hearing his voice, calling out numbers, like he was still trying to map the trails." Michael spoke up. "Like the voices we heard yesterday?" Mrs. Whitaker nodded. Then came others, Thompson in 89, Richards in 95. Each time a ranger died, the mist got thicker. More voices joined in. "But why?" I asked. "Why rangers?" "The mountains," she said softly. "They're lonely, I think. They keep a piece of each ranger who dies here, like they're building something, a family maybe, or an army." She got up and walked to an old chest in the corner. From it, she pulled out a worn piece of paper. This was McKenna's last map. See these numbers in the corner? They're the same ones people hear him calling out in the mist. I took the map with shaking hands. The numbers matched exactly what I'd heard in the whispers. And now, she said, looking straight at me. It's calling to you too, isn't it, Mr. Webb? I couldn't answer, because she was right. Every time I heard those whispers, something in me wanted to answer back. What happens to the rangers it takes? Michael asked. His voice was quiet but steady. Mrs. Whitaker's face got sad. They become part of it, part of the mountains, forever walking the trails they loved, but never really here. As if on cue, fog started creeping under her door. Michael jumped up, but I put a hand on his shoulder. It's normal fog, Mrs. Whitaker said. For now, but tonight... She looked at me hard. Tonight will be different. The mist is strongest when it's ready to take someone new. How do you know all this? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. Because my husband was a ranger too. Class of 1890. The mist took him that same year. She touched the fog with her fingertip. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I can still hear him checking trail markers. We left Mrs. Whitaker's house with more questions than answers. The fog followed us up the mountain, getting thicker with each step. Mr. Webb? Michael's voice was shaky. What are we going to do? I looked at the mist swirling around us. In it, I could see faces forming. Mrs. Whitaker's husband, old Jack, all of them. They were clearer now, more solid, like they were getting ready for something. First, I said, we're going back to the cabin. We need to prepare. For what? I touched my ranger badge again. It felt cold under my fingers. For tonight, I said. Something tells me the mist is done just watching us. As we walked, I could hear the whispers getting louder. They weren't just calling numbers anymore. They were calling my name. We barely made it back to the cabin before dark. The fog was so thick now that I could hardly see 3 feet ahead. Michael stuck close to me, jumping at every sound. Get inside, I told him, pushing him toward the door. And whatever happens, don't... That's when we heard it. Not just whispers this time. Real voices, loud and clear. Webb! It was old Jack's voice. Webb, join us! Mr. Webb! Michael grabbed my arm. Look! The mist in front of us was changing. It wasn't just fog anymore. It was taking shape. First I saw old Jack's face, as clear as if he was standing right there. His eyes were sad, but his mouth was smiling. Next to him, other faces appeared. Every ranger who'd ever died in these mountains. It's so peaceful here, Webb, old Jack said. His voice sounded like it was coming from far away and right next to me at the same time. No more pain. No more bad memories from the war. Just the mountains. Forever. I won't lie. Part of me wanted to go to them. The war memories that haunted me. They promised peace from all that. Don't listen to them, Mr. Webb. Michael was pulling on my sleeve. Remember what Mrs. Whitaker said. But the mist was moving closer. I could see hands reaching out now, made of fog, but somehow solid too. And the voices. They were all calling to me. Join us, Webb! Become part of the mountain. Stay with us forever. I backed up against the cabin wall. Michael, get inside. Now. I won't leave you. That's an order, kid. I pushed him toward the door. But before he could reach it, the mist surrounded us completely. It was like being wrapped in a cold blanket. I could feel them all around me. Every ranger who'd ever walked these trails. Their memories flooded into my mind. McKenna mapping the first trails, Thompson fighting forest fires, Richards rescuing lost hikers, old Jack marking paths just like I did. They weren't evil. They weren't trying to hurt us. They were just lonely. The mountains had kept a piece of each of them, and now they wanted more. They wanted me. Please, Michael's voice cracked. Don't take him! The mist paused. I felt something change in it, like it was thinking. That's when I understood what I had to do. These mountains needed their rangers, both the living and the dead. But they didn't need to take everyone. I reached for my ranger's whistle, the one they'd given me when I first started. Every ranger had one. It was how we signaled each other in trouble. Michael, I said, taking off the whistle, Take it. What? No exclamation mark. Listen to me, kid. I pressed the whistle into his hand. The forest needs rangers who make it back alive, who can teach others, who can keep the trails safe. I looked at the faces in the mist. They have enough dead rangers. They don't need you too. The mist was swirling faster now, getting thicker. The faces were clearer than ever. Old Jack reached out his foggy hand. It's time, Webb, he said softly. The mountains are calling. I looked at Michael one last time. Blow the whistle every morning, I told him. Promise me. He was crying now. I promise. I turned to face the mist. All right, I said. I'm ready. The mist wrapped around me like a cold hug. I could hear Michael screaming my name, but his voice seemed far away now. Everything was getting foggy, not just around me, but in my mind too. Run, kid, I managed to shout. Remember your promise? I saw him turn and run, my whistle clutched tight in his hand. The mist tried to follow him, but I stood my ground. No, I said firmly. You've got me. That's enough. And then, everything changed. It's hard to explain what it feels like to become part of the mist. Imagine falling asleep, but instead of dreams, you get memories. Not just your own, but everyone's. I could see through old Jack's eyes as he marked trails on snowy days. I watched McKenna map the mountains for the first time. I felt Thompson's pride as he saved hikers from a forest fire. I wasn't scared anymore. The war memories that had haunted me for so long, they started feeling distant, like an old photograph fading in the sun. The mountains had me now, and they were gentle about it. Want to know something funny? Being dead isn't as bad as I thought it would be. I still walk my trails every day, just differently. When the morning fog rolls in, that's me and the others, checking on things. We make sure hikers stay safe, guide lost people back to the trails, and keep an eye on the new rangers. Michael kept his promise. Every morning, without fail, he'd blow my whistle. The sound would cut through any fog, no matter how thick. Somehow he always knew it was me visiting. He turned out to be a great ranger, better than I ever was. Taught dozens of new rangers over the years, and never lost a single one to the mist. Maybe because he knew what to watch for. Maybe because we helped keep them safe. 40 years he served these mountains. Every ranger in Green Mountain National Forest knew his name, Michael Foster, the man who could control the mist with just a whistle. When he finally retired, he left my whistle to the ranger station. Told them the whole story too. Most didn't believe it, of course. Called it an old man's tale. But they still keep the whistle in a glass case, and on foggy days, new rangers sometimes blow it. Just in case. You know what the funny thing is? It still works. Blow that whistle on a misty morning, and the fog will always clear, just enough to light the way. Because we're still here, me, old Jack, McKenna, and all the others. Still walking our trails, still doing our job. The mountains aren't lonely anymore. They've got their rangers, both the living ones who walk the trails in sunlight, and the dead ones who guard them in the mist. And if you're ever hiking in Green Mountain and the fog starts moving strange, don't be scared. It's just us old rangers making our rounds. But if you hear a whistle in the mist, well, maybe answer back. We like knowing someone still remembers us. A note they found in Michael Foster's diary after he retired. People ask me if I'm scared of the fog in these mountains. I tell them no, because in every mist, in every morning fog, I know he's there. Mr. Webb, my teacher, still watching over his forest, still keeping us safe. And when I blow his whistle and the fog parts, I know he's smiling. Some say there's no such thing as ghosts. Maybe they're right. But in Green Mountain, we don't have ghosts. We have rangers. And as long as these trails need watching, they'll be here. In the whispers of the wind, in the moving of the mist, in the sound of a ranger's whistle echoing through the trees, forever on patrol. My name is Riley Cooper, and I'm the head ranger at Olympic National Park. I have a PhD in forest ecology, but most days I just tell people I'm a tree doctor. It's easier that way. I've spent almost my whole life in these woods, studying why forests get sick and die. The other rangers sometimes joke that I know every tree by name. They're not entirely wrong. I never thought I'd be afraid of the forest I've loved my whole life. But that changed on a Monday morning in early October. The day started like any other. I had my usual black coffee in one hand and my tablet in the other, heading out to check on some trees that weren't looking too healthy lately. The morning was chilly enough that I could see my breath, and the sunrise was just starting to peek through the trees. That's when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. About 50 feet ahead, a perfect circle of dead trees stood out against the healthy green forest. Not just dead, they looked like they'd been cooked from the inside out, all brown and brittle. The weirdest part. I'd walked this exact path just 3 days ago, and everything had been perfectly fine. This can't be right, I said out loud, even though no one was around to hear me. My coffee suddenly felt cold in my hand. As a scientist, I knew that trees don't just die overnight, and they definitely don't die in perfect geometric patterns. Something was very, very wrong. I set my coffee down and pulled out my phone to take some pictures. As I got closer to the dead trees, something felt off. The air felt different, warmer, like standing next to a heater. That didn't make any sense in the cold morning air. "Hey, Janet, are you there?" I spoke into my radio. Janet was another ranger who usually worked the morning shift with me. "Yeah, Riley, what's up?" Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Can you come to Section B near the old hiking trail? There's something you need to see." While waiting for Janet, I did what scientists do best. I started taking notes. The dead trees formed a perfect circle about 30 feet wide. The strangest thing was how the trees on the edge of the circle were leaning away from the dead ones, like they were trying to escape from something. I knelt down to check the soil, and that's when things got even weirder. The ground was warm to the touch, almost hot, like the earth under the dead trees had a fever. I'd studied sick forests for 15 years, but I'd never seen anything like this. My hand was shaking a little as I dug up some soil samples to test. Something in the back of my mind kept telling me this wasn't just some normal tree disease. The birds were quiet, too quiet. Usually this part of the forest was full of bird songs in the morning. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the center of the circle, there was a small patch of mushrooms I'd never seen before. They were pure white, almost glowing, arranged in a spiral pattern. As a forest expert, I knew most of the mushrooms that grew in our park, but these were different. I reached out to touch one of the mushrooms, but stopped myself. Years of experience had taught me to be careful with strange fungi. Instead, I took more pictures and samples, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. That's when Janet's voice came through my radio again. "Riley, I'm seeing another circle of dead trees over in Section C. And Riley, it wasn't here yesterday." I felt my heart beat faster. 2 circles in different parts of the forest? Something was definitely wrong in my forest, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. What I didn't know then was that these circles were the first signs of something that had been sleeping under our feet for millions of years. Something that was finally waking up. I met Janet at the ranger station an hour later. Her face was pale, and she kept fidgeting with her coffee cup. On the table between us, we spread out all our photos of the dead tree circles. "Look at this," I said, pointing to my tablet screen. "In the past week, we found 7 circles. 7! And they're not random. They're forming a pattern. When I connected the circles on the map, they made a huge hexagon shape across the park, like someone, or something, had drawn it using dead trees as dots." "That's not even the weirdest part," Janet said, pulling out her phone. "Listen to this." She played a recording she'd made near one of the circles. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just forest sounds. Then I noticed it. A low humming sound, almost too quiet to hear, coming from underground. I was about to say something when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Chen, my old professor from graduate school. I'd sent him some soil samples last week, asking him to test them. "Riley," I read out loud, "you need to see this. The soil samples you sent, there's something in them. Something old. really old. Can you video chat now? My hands were sweaty as I set up my laptop. When Dr. Chen's face appeared on screen, he looked worried, and Dr. Chen never looked worried. Riley, he said, not even saying hello first. The fungus we found in your soil samples, it's not in any database. We carbon dated it, and... He paused, taking off his glasses. The spores are millions of years old, from around the time of the last mass extinction. I felt the room get colder. But they're dead, right? I mean, they can't be alive after all this time. Dr. Chen shook his head slowly. They're not dead, Riley. They're growing. And they're connecting to each other through some kind of network we've never seen before. It's like they're communicating. Just then, the lights in the ranger station flickered. Through the window, I could see dark clouds gathering over the forest, even though the weather report had promised a clear day. Dr. Chen, I said, my voice shaking a little. I think whatever's in that soil, it's waking up. The humming sound from Janet's recording suddenly seemed louder, like it was coming from right under our feet. And that was when the headache started. A strange, pulsing pain that felt less like a headache and more like something trying to get inside my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The headache got worse, and with it came strange dreams. In them, I saw the forest from above, like a bird would see it. The dead circles were glowing, connected by lines of light running deep underground, and something was trying to tell me something, not in words, but in feelings and pictures. I woke up at 3 a.m., covered in sweat. My phone was ringing. It was Janet. Riley, she sounded scared. The circles, they're spreading, and the mushrooms, they're everywhere now. I threw on my clothes and drove to the park. The full moon lit up the forest in a weird silver light. As I parked my truck, I noticed something strange. All the night animals, owls, raccoons, even the insects, were completely silent. Walking into the forest, I saw them. Those glowing white mushrooms from my dreams were growing everywhere, forming spiral patterns on the ground. The air felt thick and warm, like being in a greenhouse. Then it hit me. A wave of something. Not pain exactly, but pressure in my head. And with it came images, like watching a movie in my mind. I saw the earth millions of years ago, a vast network of fungi spreading through the soil, connecting all living things. Then something terrible happened. The last mass extinction. The fungi went to sleep deep underground, waiting for the right time to wake up. And now they were awake, because our forests were dying. They thought they were helping, trying to connect everything like they did in the ancient past. But their help was killing the trees. Stop, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to myself or to whatever was sending these thoughts. You're killing them. The pressure in my head grew stronger. More images flooded in. The fungi showing me how they could connect all living things again, make everything work together like it did millions of years ago. They wanted me to help them, to be their bridge to the modern world. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. The mushrooms around me pulsed with a soft light, like they were breathing. Through my tears, I could see more trees dying, the circles spreading faster now. I had to make a choice. The ancient fungi were trying to help, but they didn't understand our world anymore. They were like a doctor using million-year-old medicine. Their cure was worse than the disease. My radio crackled. Riley. It was Janet again. The governor just declared a state of emergency. The circles, they're appearing in other forests now. It's spreading across the state. I stood up shakily, my head still buzzing with the ancient fungi's thoughts. They were showing me more now, how they could use me to talk to humans, to explain their plan. But I also saw the truth. If they kept spreading, they would kill every forest on Earth, thinking they were saving it. I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Chen. The signal was weak, but he answered. Dr. Chen, I said quickly, the fungal network. Would extreme cold stop it? Yes. In theory. These organisms evolved in a warmer Earth. Extreme cold might force them back to dormancy, but... The call cut off. Around me, the mushroom's glow was getting brighter, almost angry. They knew what I was thinking. I started running back to the ranger station. We had a backup generator there, and more importantly, we had the park's emergency cooling system, originally designed to preserve samples in case of a fire. The fungi didn't want me to make it. Mushrooms burst from the ground in my path. The pressure in my head became almost unbearable. Images flashed faster and faster, promises of a connected world, threats of what would happen if I stopped them. But then I saw something that made me run faster. A young maple tree, one I'd planted myself 5 years ago, beginning to die as the fungal network reached it. I crashed through the ranger station door, my hands shaking as I started the generator. The fungi were in my head now, their thoughts mixing with mine. Part of me wanted to help them. They weren't evil. They were just too old, too different, trying to heal a world that had changed too much while they slept. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I reached for the cooling system controls. But sometimes the best way to help is to let go. Just as my fingers touched the switch, something incredible happened. Something that would change my life forever. Just before I could flip the switch, I felt something change inside my mind. The fungi weren't just showing me pictures anymore. They were becoming part of me. I understood them, and they finally understood me. Through my eyes, they saw what they were really doing to our world. "We can find another way," I said out loud, my voice shaking. "Let me help you understand our forests." The pressure in my head eased. The angry glow of the mushroom softened. Through our connection, I showed them how our modern forests worked, how different things were now. And they showed me something too, how to help them pull back, to sleep again, but this time leaving a tiny thread of connection. Through me. Over the next few days, the dead circles stopped spreading. The white mushrooms slowly disappeared back into the ground. The trees stopped dying. On the surface, everything went back to normal. But I was different. I could feel the forest now, really feel it. The fungi left me as a bridge, not to control things like they wanted to before, but to understand, to translate between their ancient wisdom and our modern world. 1 month later, I stood in the last dead circle, watching new seedlings push through the soil. Janet walked up beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "So," she said, handing me a cup, "what's it like, being the forest's translator?" I smiled, feeling the gentle hum of fungal thoughts at the edge of my mind. They were sleeping again, but not completely. Just enough to whisper secrets about how trees talk to each other, how to help sick forests heal themselves, how to protect what we have. "It's like learning a new language," I told her. "A really, really old one." My phone buzzed. Another message from Dr. Chen. Scientists around the world wanted to learn about what happened here, about how an ancient intelligence taught us to listen to the forest in a whole new way. That night, standing at my window, I watched the moon rise over the trees. The forest looked the same as it always had, but now I knew its secret. Sometimes the scariest things turn out to be the best teachers, and sometimes to save something you love, you have to learn to speak its language, even if that language is millions of years old. The headache still comes sometimes when the fungi have something important to tell me. But I'm not afraid anymore. Because now I know I'm not just a ranger or a scientist. I'm something new, a translator between 2 worlds, helping ancient wisdom and modern knowledge work together to protect the forests we all need to survive. Like the fungi taught me, everything is connected. We just have to learn how to listen. Sometimes, silence can feel like a living thing. I've spent over 20 years walking these canyon paths at night, but I've never felt a silence quite like this one. It's the kind that makes you want to hold your breath, like the whole canyon is waiting for something to happen. I'm James Martinez, Night Patrol Ranger at the Grand Canyon. Most nights, my job is pretty simple. Check the trails, help lost hikers, make sure everyone's safe. But for the past few weeks, nothing has felt simple anymore. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, catching bits of red rock and deep shadows. The beam feels too small against all this darkness, like a match in an endless cave. I try not to think about how the shadows seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks ago. A tourist reported seeing lights in Thunder Canyon. Not normal lights, but ones that danced and moved in ways that made no sense. I wrote it off. You see all sorts of things out here when your mind starts playing tricks on you. Then came the second report, and the third, and the 10th, all describing the same impossible lights. I pause on the trail, my boots crunching on loose gravel. That's when I hear it. The radio at my belt crackles to life, but not with the usual static. This sound is different, clearer, wrong. This is Grand Canyon Radio, broadcasting on June 15th, 1952. My heart skips a beat. The voice is too clear, too present, like someone from 1952 is standing right next to me. I check my phone with shaking hands. October 12th, 2023, 4:17 a.m. Before I can process what this means, another voice breaks through. A child's laugh, bright and familiar, followed by words that turn my blood to ice. Jimmy, don't get too close to the edge. My notebook falls from my trembling fingers. That voice, it's my mother's. Not as she sounds now, but exactly as she did 50 years ago, when I was that little boy playing too close to the canyon's edge. The radio goes silent, but the silence feels heavier now, like the darkness is listening. With numb fingers, I pick up my notebook and write down what just happened. The pages are filled with similar strange events, each one making less sense than the last. But this, hearing my mother's voice from the past, it's different, personal, like the canyon is trying to tell me something. I switch off my flashlight, letting the darkness wrap around me. The vast emptiness of the canyon stretches out before me, a black void that might hold anything. Time itself feels wrong here now, like a clock that started running backwards. Something is happening in my canyon, something that bends time like a mirage bends light. And I'm starting to think those missing hikers I'm supposed to look for tomorrow. They haven't even disappeared yet. The wind whispers through the rocks, and for a moment, it almost sounds like voices from another time. I click my flashlight back on and step forward. Whatever's out there in the darkness, whatever's twisting time into knots, I have to find it, before it finds me. I knew I had to check out Thunder Canyon. That's where most of the strange lights had been seen. My watch showed 4:45 a.m., still dark enough to spot anything unusual. The scariest part? I was hoping to see something weird. At least then I'd know I wasn't going crazy. Walking down the narrow trail, my flashlight caught something that made me stop. Footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. But they were strange. They started in the middle of the path and just ended after a few steps. Like someone had appeared out of nowhere, walked a bit, then vanished. I crouched down to look closer. The shoe prints looked old-fashioned, like the hiking boots people wore back in the 1950s. My grandfather had a pair just like these in an old photo. That's when my radio came to life again. This time it wasn't just voices. I could hear music. An old song my dad used to whistle. But mixed in with it was something else. Help, we're stuck. October 15th. Can anyone? October 15th. That was 3 days from now. My hands got sweaty around my flashlight. Was I hearing people who needed help? But in the future? It didn't make sense, but neither did anything else happening tonight. I walked a bit further, and the air started feeling weird. You know how it feels different right before a storm? Like that, but stranger. The hairs on my arms stood up and my flashlight began to flicker. Then I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, a soft blue light glowed behind some rocks. It moved like water, but it was in the air, and through it, I could see something. It looked like the same trail I was on, but different. Older wooden signs, different plants. I pulled out my phone to take a video, but it was dead. So was my radio. Even my trusty flashlight was getting dimmer. The only light now came from that strange blue glow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped closer. The air got thicker, harder to move through. That's when I heard voices again, but not through the radio this time. They were coming from the light itself. The trail should be right here, Maybe we took a wrong turn. Let's wait for morning. I recognized those voices. They were from the Miller family, a group of hikers who were supposed to go missing in 3 days. I had seen their permit request on my desk just yesterday. But here they were, lost in the future, their voices somehow reaching back through time to right now. And I was probably the only person who could stop it from happening. Standing there in the growing darkness, I had to make a choice. Keep watching and gathering evidence, or try to change something that hadn't even happened yet. The blue light pulsed, like it was waiting for my decision. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Sometimes it means doing what needs to be done, even though you're terrified. I took another step toward the light, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Whatever was bending time in my canyon, I was about to meet it face to face. That blue light was now just 10 steps away. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, like walking through deep water. The air hummed with a sound I could feel in my teeth. Not quite a buzz, not quite a whisper. Then I heard something that made me freeze. My own voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is Ranger Martinez." But I hadn't said anything. The voice was coming from the blue light, and it sounded tired, worried, like I'd been searching for hours. Was this me from the future? Suddenly, the light grew brighter, and I could see through it like a window. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was the same canyon, but in daylight. And there I was, 3 days from now, walking with my flashlight even though it was sunny. Like I'd been searching so long I'd forgotten I didn't need it anymore. The pieces started coming together in my head. The Miller family would go missing soon. Future me would look for them. But they wouldn't just be lost in the canyon. They'd be lost in time itself. I pulled out my notebook with shaking hands and wrote, "Blue light equals doorway in time. Millers will enter on October 15th. Need to stop them before they start hiking." The light pulsed again, stronger this time. Through it, I heard more voices mixing together. Past, present, and future all jumbled up. "Jimmy, don't get too close." My mom, from the past. "The trail should be here." Mr. Miller, from the future. "Anyone there?" Future me, still searching. I had to make a choice. I could try to go through the light and help future me find them. Or I could race back to the ranger station and stop the Millers before they even started their hike. But what if going through that light was what caused all this in the first place? My radio suddenly crackled back to life. Through the static, I heard something that made my decision for me. "Daddy, I'm scared." Sally Miller, age 8. "It's okay, sweetie. Someone will find us." Mrs. Miller. "The light's coming back." Mr. Miller. They were alive, lost in some kind of time trap, but alive, and they were counting on me, even if they didn't know it yet. I did something then that went against all my ranger training. I took off my jacket, tied one sleeve to a rock so I could find this exact spot again, and stepped toward the light. The humming got louder. The air felt like jelly. My whole body tingled like I'd stuck my finger in an electric socket. Just before I stepped through, I thought about my own kids, how they were older than me now, something that still made my head hurt when I thought about it too much. Would this make everything even more confusing? Would I come back younger, older? Would I come back at all? But there was a family out there, or there would be, who needed help. That's what rangers do. We help people. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and stepped into the light. The last thing I heard was my own voice from some other time. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Stepping through that light felt like diving into warm water, but backwards and upside down all at once. For a moment, I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. Then everything came into focus. I was still in Thunder Canyon, but the sun was high in the sky. My jacket was gone, the one I'd tied to the rock. But that wasn't the strangest thing. My hands looked different, younger. The old scar from a climbing accident 2 years ago had vanished. "About time you got here." The voice came from behind me. I turned around and there I was, the older looking tired and worried. He, or I guess I should say I, Had 3 days of beard growth and dark circles under my eyes. The Millers? I asked. Trapped, my older self said. They keep slipping between times. 1 minute they're here, the next they're gone. But I think I've figured it out. He pointed to the canyon wall. There's something in that cave up there. Something old. It's been here longer than the canyon itself, I think. And it's lonely. As if answering, a soft blue glow pulsed from the cave entrance. It's been reaching out, older me explained, pulling people in from different times, trying to make friends. But humans aren't meant to move through time like that. The Millers are scattered. The parents are in 1952, the kids are in 1983, and they keep jumping around. How do we fix it? We need to. But he disappeared mid-sentence, like someone had switched off a TV. In the distance, I heard Sally Miller crying. I started climbing toward the cave. The air got thicker with each step, and I could hear snippets of voices from different times. A Native American child laughing, maybe hundreds of years ago. Tourists taking photos, sounded like the 1960s. My own voice giving trail directions, probably last week. The cave entrance was small, just big enough to crawl through. Inside, the blue light was everywhere, swirling like the northern lights I'd once seen in Alaska. And in the middle of it all was something. It looked like a fold in the air itself, like someone had pinched space and time and twisted them together. Through it, I could see flashes. The Millers having breakfast this morning. The same spot in the cave, but 70 years ago. My own kids, now older than me, worried about where I'd disappeared to. That's when I understood. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't trying to hurt anyone. It was like a curious child playing with toys, not realizing the toys could break. It just wanted company. I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking to it. "Hey," I said softly, like I was approaching a scared animal. "I know you're lonely. I get lonely too, out here on night patrol. But you can't keep people. It hurts them. It hurts their families." The blue light pulsed, almost like it was listening. "How about this? I'll visit you. Not by time traveling, but the regular way. I'll come talk to you on my patrols. But you have to let the Millers go. All of them. Back to their right time." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cave filled with the brightest light I'd ever seen. When I could see again, I heard voices outside the cave. Normal voices. The Millers, all together, sounding confused, but okay. I started to feel dizzy. The cave was spinning, or maybe time was. The last thing I saw was my older self, smiling and giving me a thumbs up before everything went dark. I had no idea if I'd ever be the same after this. But at least the Millers were safe. And somewhere in the canyon, a lonely thing that lived in the folds of time had made its first real friend. When I woke up, I was lying on the canyon floor just outside the cave. The sun was rising, painting the rocks in orange and pink. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. Then I noticed my hands. They were different, younger, like they'd been in the cave. My phone said it was October 13th, 2023. Only 1 day had passed, not 3. The Millers were safe at home, probably getting ready for a hike they'd never take now. But something else was different too. When I looked in my phone's camera, a much younger face stared back. I looked like I was in my 30s again. My gray hair was dark. The wrinkles around my eyes were gone. My radio crackled. "Martinez? You okay out there? You missed your check-in." "I'm fine," I said, then added, "Just had a long night." That's when the hard part started. How do you explain to people that you're suddenly 20 years younger? How do you talk to your kids when they look older than you do? I walked back to the ranger station slowly, trying to figure out what to say. The morning hikers who passed me didn't recognize me. Of course they didn't. I barely recognized myself. At the station, my boss stared at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "Martinez? That really you?" I nodded. "It's a long story. Does it have something to do with those lights people keep seeing?" "Sort of." I took a deep breath. Remember those missing person cases from the 50s? The ones that never got solved? I think I know what happened to them. He looked at my younger face again and just nodded slowly. Sometimes in places like the Grand Canyon, you learn to accept that some things can't be explained. Later that day, I called my kids. My daughter answered, and I could hear the shock in her voice. "Dad, you sound different." "Yeah," I said. "I look different too, but I'm still me, still your dad." There was a long pause. Then she said something that made me tear up. "Well, I always said you were young at heart." That night, I went back to Thunder Canyon. The blue light was there, softer now, like a nightlight. I sat down on a rock and started talking, just like I'd promised. "So," I said to the light, "how was your day?" The light pulsed gently, almost like it was happy to see me. From my radio came bits and pieces of old songs, cheerful voices from different times, its way of talking back. I smiled. Being a ranger was always about protecting both the canyon and the people who visited it. Now I was protecting time itself and making sure a lonely thing in a cave had a friend to talk to. My life would never be normal again. My kids were older than me, and I had a lot of explaining to do to, well, everyone. But sitting there, watching the stars come out while talking to a friendly light that bent time, I realized something. Sometimes the strangest things in life turn out to be the most beautiful. I pulled out my notebook one last time and wrote, October 13th, 2023. Or maybe it's 2003 for my body now. Hard to tell. Made a new friend today. Saved a family before they needed saving. Got younger instead of older. All in all, not a bad night's work for a canyon ranger. The light flickered, almost like it was laughing with me. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted. Just another night in the canyon. Except now I knew that in some of the deeper shadows, time itself was folding and unfolding like origami, watched over by a lonely thing that wasn't so lonely anymore. And me? I was right where I belonged, even if I had to bend time itself to get here. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The fog was thick around the hot springs, making everything look like it was wrapped in a white blanket. As I stood there on the wooden walkway, watching the sun try to break through the mist, I could feel in my bones that something was different about this day. My name is John Running Wolf, and I'm the head ranger here at Yellowstone National Park. Being the first Native American to hold this position means a lot to me, but it's not just about wearing the uniform. You see, my family has been part of these lands for generations. My grandfather worked here as a trail guide back in the early 1900s, showing visitors around when the park was still young. Then my father spent 30 years taking care of the park's roads and buildings. Now here I am, following in their footsteps, but walking my own path. At 52, I've spent more time among these steaming pools and bubbling springs than anywhere else. But I carry something special with me that most other rangers don't, the old stories of my people. My grandmother made sure I knew them all. She'd sit with me by the fire when I was little, telling me about the spirits that live in the waters, spirits that have been here since the mountains were young. That morning, as I did my usual walk around the thermal pools, something caught my attention. The steam rising from the hot springs seemed different. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn I heard whispers in the mist, the kind of whispers my grandmother used to tell me about. The voices of the water spirits, she'd say, speak only to those who know how to listen. I checked my watch. It was barely 7 a.m., but already I could see the early tourists arriving with their cameras and guidebooks. They were eager to take pictures of the colorful pools and rushing geysers. I watched them point and smile, taking selfies and reading the information boards. They saw the beauty of Yellowstone, sure, but they missed its soul. They didn't know that every bubble in these pools told a story, that every wisp of steam carried a message from the past. As head ranger, it's my job to make sure everyone stays safe and follows the rules. But I have another job too, one that was given to me by my grandmother, keeping the old wisdom alive. Sometimes these two duties fit together as naturally as breathing. Other times, like that morning, they pull me in different directions. I was about to start my morning rounds when Billy, one of our newest rangers, came running up to me. His face was flushed, and he was breathing hard like he'd run all the way from the lower basin. The look in his eyes told me something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. "Mr. Running Wolf," he panted, "you need to see this. There's something strange down by the new thermal area, something I've never seen before." I felt a tingle run down my spine, the same feeling I used to get when my grandmother would start telling her most important stories. The mist swirled around us, and somewhere in the distance, a geyser rumbled awake. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change not only my life, but the very heart of Yellowstone itself. I followed Billy down the trail, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The morning was getting warmer, but something in the air made my skin prickle with goosebumps. As we got closer to the lower basin, the smell of sulfur got stronger, that familiar rotten egg smell that visitors always wrinkle their noses at. "It's just around this bend," Billy said, pointing ahead. "We found it during the early morning check. At first I thought someone had vandalized the area, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. When we turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. A new steam vent had opened up overnight. That wasn't unusual in Yellowstone, where the ground is always changing. But what made my heart skip a beat were the markings on the rocks around it. They were pictographs, ancient drawings like the ones my grandmother had shown me in the old tribal books. "Did someone paint these?" Billy asked, reaching out to touch them. "Don't," I said quickly, maybe a bit too sharply. "Let's not touch anything yet." The markings weren't painted. They seemed to have emerged from inside the rock itself, like they'd been there all along, just waiting to be uncovered. I pulled out my phone and snapped some pictures, then got down on one knee to look closer. The symbols were ones I recognized from my grandmother's teachings: flowing water, spirit circles, and the ancient sign for warning. But these weren't just random markings. They told a story, one that made my chest tighten with worry. "We need to rope off this area," I told Billy. "Get some barriers up before the morning crowds arrive." As if on cue, I heard voices approaching, the first tour group of the day. Billy hurried off to get the barriers while I stayed behind, studying the markings. One symbol in particular caught my eye, the water spirit symbol, but it was different from how I remembered it. Instead of flowing freely, it looked twisted, almost like it was in pain. Just then, the ground beneath my feet trembled slightly. A tourist might have mistaken it for one of Yellowstone's regular thermal movements, but I knew better. This vibration had a pattern to it, like a heartbeat. I remembered my grandmother's words. "The old ones speak in many ways, John. Through the steam, through the waters, through the very rocks beneath our feet. But nowadays, fewer and fewer people know how to listen." The tour group rounded the corner, and I straightened up, putting on my professional ranger face. "Good morning, folks. I'm sorry, but this area is temporarily closed for safety assessment." As I directed them to a different path, I could have sworn I heard something in the steam vent. Not the usual hissing, but something that sounded almost like words. Back in my office later that morning, I spread out the photos I'd taken and opened my grandmother's old journal. The tourists outside my window were going about their day as usual, but my hands shook slightly as I turned the pages. The last time similar markings had appeared in the park was in 1886, right before the great geothermal event that my great-grandfather had witnessed. My phone buzzed. Another ranger reporting unusual activity, this time near Old Faithful. As I grabbed my jacket and headed out, I knew deep in my gut that these weren't isolated incidents. Something was waking up in Yellowstone, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The question was, what was it trying to tell us? That afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the mountains, I walked alone to the spot where the largest hot spring bubbled and steamed. The tourists had mostly gone back to their hotels, and the parking lots were nearly empty. It was my favorite time of day in the park, when nature seemed to breathe a little easier. I sat down on a bench, pulled out my grandmother's old leather journal, and started reading through her notes again. But something made me look up. The steam from the pool was moving in a way I'd never seen before. Instead of rising straight up, it was swirling in circles. like a slow-moving tornado. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was just the steam playing tricks on my eyes. But no, there was definitely a figure in the mist. She looked like she was made of water and light, her form shifting and changing like the surface of a pool in the wind. Her eyes were the deep blue of the hottest springs. I didn't feel scared exactly. Something in my heart told me I was seeing what my grandmother had described in her stories. One of the water spirits, the ancient guardians of Yellowstone. "You can see me," she said. Her voice sounded like water flowing over rocks. So few can anymore. I nodded, my throat feeling dry. My grandmother taught me the old ways. The spirit's form rippled. Your people remembered us. But now... She gestured at the empty boardwalks and visitor centers. Now there are only buildings and barriers. The waters are trapped, controlled, turned into pictures for little screens. As she spoke, I noticed more strange things happening. Small whirlpools appeared in pools that were usually still. Steam vents hissed louder than normal. The ground rumbled softly under my feet. "Is that why the pictographs appeared?" I asked. "Are you trying to tell us something?" The spirit moved closer. Even though she was made of mist, I could feel a deep sadness coming from her. "The balance is breaking," she said. "Too many feet on sacred ground. Too many changes too fast. The old paths of power are being blocked." Just then, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Chief Running Wolf, we've got reports of unusual activity at 3 more thermal sites," a voice said. "Visitors are getting nervous." I grabbed my radio to respond, but when I looked back up, the spirit was gone. The steam had returned to its normal pattern, rising straight up into the darkening sky. But things had changed. Now I understood why the pictographs had appeared. The spirit wasn't just trying to communicate. She was warning us. The park wasn't just a tourist attraction or a nature preserve. It was a living thing, and we were hurting it without even knowing. As I walked back to my truck, my mind was racing. How could I explain this to the park management? They dealt with visitor numbers and safety regulations, not water spirits and ancient warnings. But I knew I had to try. Because if I didn't, something told me things were only going to get worse. The sun had set completely now, and the first stars were coming out. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo how I felt. I had always known being the first Native American head ranger would be challenging, but I never expected to be caught between two worlds quite like this. My phone buzzed with more reports of strange happenings around the park. Tomorrow would be a busy day, but as I drove home, I couldn't help smiling a little. My grandmother had always told me the old stories were real. Now I knew just how right she'd been. I spent the next morning in my small office, surrounded by papers and old books. My grandmother's journal lay open on my desk, and next to it were maps of Yellowstone from different years. Looking at them side by side, I could see how much the park had changed. Where there used to be open spaces, there were now parking lots. Where animals once roamed freely, there were now gift shops and restaurants. A knock on my door made me look up. It was Sarah Two Rivers, one of our senior rangers who, like me, came from a Native American family. "John," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "Strange things are happening at my section of the park, too. This morning, I saw steam spelling out words in our ancient language." I wasn't surprised. "You can see them too, then?" She nodded. "My grandfather used to say that only those who know the old stories can see the signs. But John, the tourists, they're starting to notice something's wrong. 3 hot springs changed color overnight. The geysers aren't erupting when they're supposed to." Just then, my phone rang. It was Mr. Thompson, the park superintendent, and he didn't sound happy. "Running Wolf, we've got a situation here. Visitors are complaining about unusual activity all over the park. Some are even asking for refunds. We need this sorted out and fast." After I hung up, I looked at Sarah. "They want answers, but how can I explain what's really happening? How do I tell them that a water spirit is trying to warn us?" Sarah picked up one of the maps. "Maybe we don't need to explain everything. Maybe we just need to show them what's changed." She pointed to several spots on the map. "Look, All the strange incidents are happening where we've built new structures in the last 10 years. My eyes widened as I saw the pattern. The Spirit's words came back to me. The old paths of power are being blocked. Just then, the ground shook harder than before. Coffee spilled from my cup, and the pictures rattled on the walls. My walkie-talkie crackled with panicked voices from rangers all over the park. Old Faithful just erupted 10 minutes early. The morning glory pool is changing colors. The boardwalk near the Grand Prismatic Spring is shaking. I looked at Sarah. We need to act fast, but we can't just close down parts of the park without a good reason. Maybe we do have a reason, Sarah said slowly. Look at these temperature readings from the affected areas. They're all showing unusual patterns. That's scientific proof that something's wrong. She was right. Even without mentioning spirits or ancient warnings, we had real evidence that the park's delicate balance was being disrupted. I gathered up the maps and temperature charts. I'm calling an emergency meeting with the park management. We need to show them what's happening before things get worse. As I walked to the meeting room, I felt the weight of both worlds on my shoulders, the modern world of facts and figures, and the ancient world of spirits and sacred places. Somehow, I had to find a way to protect them both. The Spirit had trusted me with her warning. Now I had to find a way to make others listen, even if they couldn't see what I saw. Dark clouds gathered over Yellowstone that evening, bringing with them a storm unlike any I'd seen before. Lightning flashed across the sky, but instead of normal white light, it glowed with an odd blue color, the same blue as the deepest hot springs. I stood at the edge of the main basin, rain soaking through my ranger jacket. The tourists had all fled inside, leaving me alone with the rumbling earth and howling wind. I knew what I had to do. "I'm here," I called out over the storm. "I understand now what you've been trying to tell us." The steam from the hot springs began to swirl and gather, just like before. The water spirit appeared, but this time she looked stronger, more solid. Her eyes flashed like lightning. "You understand," she said, but the others continue to build. They put walls where the healing waters once flowed freely. They trapped the sacred steam in their pipes. I took a deep breath. "I have a proposal," I said, pulling out the maps I'd marked. Even in the rain, the ink showed clearly where we could make changes. We can create new protected areas, places where no one can build, where the waters can flow naturally again. The Spirit moved closer, looking at my maps. The rain stopped falling where she hovered, creating a dry circle around us. "And why should I trust the words of humans again?" she asked. "They have made promises before." "Because I'm not just making a promise," I said firmly. "I've already convinced the park management. Look." I pulled out official documents from my waterproof bag. These areas will be officially marked as culturally significant sites. No building allowed, and we'll remove some of the newer structures that are blocking the old water paths. Thunder rolled overhead as the Spirit considered my words. The ground trembled beneath my feet. "You speak with two voices," she said finally. "One from the new world of paper and rules, one from the old world of spirits and stories. This is good. This is needed." Suddenly, the shaking ground grew still. The blue lightning faded to normal white. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle. "I will trust you, John Running Wolf," the Spirit said. "But remember, I will be watching. Always watching." Her form began to change, spreading out like morning mist. But before she disappeared completely, I saw her smile. It reminded me of my grandmother's smile when I'd finally understood an important lesson. I stood there for a long time after she vanished, feeling the soft rain on my face and the steady earth under my feet. For the first time in days, the park felt peaceful again. Different, but peaceful. Like me, Yellowstone would keep living in two worlds, one foot in the present, one in the past. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. 1 year has passed since that stormy night. Yellowstone feels different now, but in a good way. The changes we made have turned out better than I could have hoped. This morning, I stood at my favorite spot near the old basin, watching the sunrise paint the steam in gold and pink colors. The new Protected cultural areas signs stand at the edges of the territory we saved. Where we removed the old gift shop and parking lot, wildflowers now grow between the springs. Even the animals seem to visit these areas more often. Just yesterday, I saw a family of elk drinking from a stream that had been buried under concrete last year. Quite a change, isn't it? Sarah Two Rivers said, walking up beside me. She's been promoted to assistant head ranger now, and together we make sure the spirit's wishes are respected. Sure is, I replied, smiling as I watched a group of school kids walk by. Instead of just taking selfies, they were listening carefully to their guide talking about the old stories of these lands. That was another change we'd made, adding traditional knowledge to all park tours. The water spirit keeps her promise to watch over things. Sometimes, early in the morning or late at night, I catch glimpses of her in the steam. She doesn't look angry anymore. Now she moves through her springs and geysers like a happy dancer, making the waters shimmer with beautiful colors. Last week, something amazing happened. Old Faithful, which had been acting unpredictable for years, settled back into its natural rhythm. The scientists can't explain it, but I know why. We finally learned to listen to what the land was telling us. My grandmother's journal sits in a special display case in the new visitor center now. Next to it, there's a photo of the pictographs that appeared that strange morning a year ago. Most tourists think they're just interesting ancient drawings, but some visitors, usually kids or elders, look at them with knowing eyes. They understand there's more to Yellowstone than what you can see with your eyes. As I finish my morning rounds, I spot something that makes me smile. Near one of the springs, steam rises in a perfect spiral, forming what looks like a gentle hand reaching up to touch the sky. It's the spirit's way of saying good morning. I touch the badge on my chest, the first Native American head ranger's badge in Yellowstone history. It means more now than ever before, because now I know that being a ranger isn't just about protecting the park from people. Sometimes it's about protecting people from the park, and sometimes it's about protecting both from each other. Thank you, grandmother, I whisper to the morning air, for teaching me how to listen. The steam swirls gently in response, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls a greeting to the new day. In modern Yellowstone, the old magic still lives. You just have to know where to look for it.